Hello, I am the Scripted Doctor and welcome to the channel. So, why do characters do what they do? Why do they go left when they could go right? Why do they say I don't instead of I do? Why do they give an ultimatum instead of taking what they want? That's a prominent question to be asked when writing a story. The choices a character makes helps define them to an audience, and those choices need to establish actions, behavior, and dialogue, showing growth with consistency, otherwise they would be behaving out of character. The way you develop a character over a story is by properly understanding the use of cause and effect. If a character makes a decision that is in line of what has been established, and then the effect of that decision ruins their ability to achieve their goal, the result should be a learning experience. When they are faced with another similar situation, there has been an established moment where they can make a different choice as a result of that previous experience, thus giving us character growth.
What's wrong, dude? You yellow?
Nobody calls me yellow.
Martin used to let men provoke him into fight. He was concerned that people would think him a coward if he refused. That's how he got a Bowie knife shoved through his belly in a saloon in Virginia City.
Marty, we all have to make decisions that affect the course of our lives. You've got to do what you've got to do.
He's an asshole. I don't care what Tannen says, and I don't care what anybody else says either.
These questions don't just pertain to character, although it is better to think of character first when writing, but you can ask these questions about your plot as well. If you're going to set up an action or a set piece, it is a good idea to ask questions about that set piece. Why are we at this set piece, and how did we get here? How could it go wrong? What happens if it does go wrong? And what opportunities does it present for your characters if it doesn't go according to plan? These questions can help writers create unpredictable moments that give the audience a sense of drama, stakes, urgency, and surprise. And the reason I'm spending some time on these questions is because clearly this is an ongoing issue when it comes to The Mandalorian. And this week's recent episode is a great example of those questions not being asked or even thought about. Please be advised this review contains spoilers. If you do not wish to be spoiled, please return to this review after having watched the episode. With that being said, let's take a look at Chapter 15, The Believer. We open up in a scrap heap, or the chop fields as described in the previous episode, where Mayfield is working away on a TIE fighter, and I am quite relieved that this opening is in fact a conditional release instead of a jailbreak. While a jailbreak can be fun and dramatic, we've already seen that in the last season, and given how the show has spent entire episodes on a single plot development, and there is only one other episode left in this season, it would be quite a waste to dedicate it to freeing Mayfield instead of the overall goal of rescuing the child. So it was great to see Cara Dune pick up Mayfield, and his reaction and fear of the sudden change. Speaking of sudden changes, Boba Fett has cleaned up his armor and given it a new paint job. He's still sporting those Tatooine robes underneath, but it is a little odd to see Boba Fett in this way. Part of the intrigue was the battle-scarred armor, and this flat paint scheme is lacking a certain life to the armor. It feels too clean for such a character. I also think it was a missed opportunity for the show, where they could have made the new paint job a little closer to the first time fans saw Boba Fett in the Star Wars Holiday Special. The Mandalorian has the silver appearance, why not give Boba Fett a little bit of the gold? It's really more of an aesthetic curiosity for me. I kind of liked that old style configuration. Getting back to the episode, we learned that the Mandalorian needs Mayfield, who was a former Imperial, for his Imperial knowledge of clearances and protocols. On board the Slave One, we see this cool effect where the seating below the cockpit rotates to a new orientation as they take off. It's a nice background detail to reveal while Mayfield learns why he's been brought on this mission. The goal is to find the coordinates of Moff Gideon's cruiser, which is a weird sentence to hear, as a cruiser is not a stationary object in the same vein as a planet. While a planet also changes location as it rotates around a star, it still has a relative point of reference to identify and find. But a starship does not, so its coordinates can change quite often. Would it not be more in line to ask for Mayfield to help find out what Gideon's destination is, or if he has a home base? Something more stationary and reliable. Maybe search for a transponder code that signals where the ship is at that moment and provides trajectory or details on a specific hyperlane that it is traveling. Maybe with options cannons for various destinations. What about those fobs we had in the previous season? Can those still be used, or has the production realized how much of an issue those things were to their plot from last season and have decided to ignore them? It doesn't bode well for your story where the driving force is itself a plot hole. Mayfeld refuses to cooperate and would much rather return to the scrap heap, but they try to appeal to his conscience, assuming he has one, when they mention that Gideon has taken the kid. Mayfeld hopes that if he helps them get the child, he'll be let go, but Kara shoots down that idea rather quickly. Mayfeld chooses to cooperate, having literally no alternatives in the matter, and informs the team that he needs access to an Imperial terminal, and one can be found on the planet Morak. It turns out that there is a secret Imperial mining hub on this planet. If they can break in, Mayfeld can get the coordinates they need. What is odd is that for a secret Imperial mining hub, it was quite easy for Boba Fett to scan and find before they approach. So how is it that the Republic hasn't found this facility? Have they decided that the rumors of Morak being an inconsequential planet are substantive enough to not be deemed worthy of an investigation or patrol? Aside from exposing more incompetence from the Republic, we learn that they're going after a rhydonium refinery, a substance that is highly volatile and explosive. So I guess this facility is using it to make bombs for the Imperials. Getting in won't be an easy job as they have anti-aircraft cannons and a platoon of security, so it looks like they'll have to find a more covert opportunity. As they scope out the area, Mayfeld remarks how once he gets the coordinates they'll need a quick escape. Boba Fett decides to ignore those anti-aircraft cannons he mentioned earlier and advises him to get to the roof and he'll drop in to pick him up. Their plan to get inside involves Mayfeld and Cara Dune taking over one of the transports and posing in as guards. But that plan isn't going to work, as Mayfeld informs the team that the Imperials have the means to run genetic scans on their troops. So if anyone that's on record as being part of the Republic like Cara Dune is found, it will mean guns drawn. Cara eggs him on about his knowledge of Imperial remnants that irks Mayfeld. Apparently he's sore about being referred to as an Imperial. The Mandalorian steps over this potential argument and suggests for Fennec to go, but she too is wanted by the Imperials, so that option is also out. Boba Fett isn't an option either, as he's concerned the Imperials might recognize his face, most likely because of the clone troopers from the old Republic days. But this raises a curious question. Couldn't Boba Fett, being a man that is identical to the clone troopers in many ways, not be utilized for this type of mission? Couldn't Boba Fett pose as a 20-plus year veteran clone trooper still part of the Empire? While using him may draw some attention, it could also draw a certain level of reverence as well, as he would be viewed as one of the essential soldiers that led to the rise of the Empire. It could be a very good distraction for Mayfeld to get the coordinates, and it may come with an angle of authority for Boba Fett to exploit so they can make an easy escape. But while that does have intelligence and strategy behind it, with a possible dash of suspense, it doesn't do what the writer really wants to have happen in this story, and that is to put Mayfeld and the Mandalorian together on this mission. Now, the story does lay out the complications with this pairing. Mayfeld brings up how he can't explain why there would be a Mandalorian with him so long as he's wearing the armor, but the Mandalorian has a plan to go along but not have to show his face. This episode utilizes the classic wearing enemy skin trope as noted by Joseph Campbell. We've seen it in the Iliad, Wizard of Oz, and also Star Wars. It is a good setup, but also has something of a flaw, as the guards that are being robbed are often the right measurements for our heroes, except for this one instance.
Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?
Huh?
They get their bearings on a transport truck, which is known as a Juggernaut from the video games and other EU properties. Cara Dune gets a moment to shine where she smacks around two stormtroopers, knocking them out. It's quite impressive that she doesn't damage their armor, nor does she appear to have hurt her own hands either. That is one tough lady. We cut to a moment later where the Mandalorian has changed into the stormtrooper armor and hands off his Beskar to Cara. Her and Fennec's responsibility is to clear the anti-aircraft gunners just before they make their escape. So this gives us our characters' roles for the episode. Boba Fett is the driver, Cara and Fennec are the cover fire, and Mayfeld and the Mandalorian are the infiltrators. And this is a good thing to define simply when conducting a heist story. So long as those goals don't change, you can throw in a lot of conflicts in their path that put that goal in jeopardy without distracting the audience of what is going on. While Mayfeld drives the transport towards the refinery, he antagonizes the Mandalorian about wearing his helmet and teases him about taking it off. As they get nearer, Mayfeld grows concerned and curious when they pass wrecked transport trucks on the side of the road. We get a little commentary from Mayfeld as they pass through a very tiny town. He espouses that from the locals' perspective, it doesn't matter if you're Imperial or Republic, you're still invaders or occupiers. He argues that he's a realist, and how there's no real difference between the Mandalorian Wars and the Empire, as the results are the same in the end. The Mandalorian contests that assumption, but Mayfield suggests that when things get desperate, the Mandalorian is willing to bend his own rules and beliefs when it suits his goals. It's a nice conversation regarding the philosophy of the Mandalorian creed that our hero took, and plays into the title of this episode about believing in that creed or faith. Mayfield ends his thoughts on a nice line to define his character.
As far as I'm concerned, if you can make it through your day and still sleep at night, you're doing better than most.
Things go awry when over the comms they hear one of the transports ahead of them has come under attack. As they get closer to the refinery, they too are met by insurgents on some skiffs. They're called pirates in the episode, but pirates tend to steal things, and these insurgents aren't interested in robbing the Imperial transports, only its destruction, so insurgents will be their designation for this episode. The Mandalorian orders Mayfield to keep on course while he handles their attackers. He does a pretty good job and learns that these insurgents are armed with thermal detonators and trying to blow up the Rhydonium. More waves arrive, but the Mandalorian's Imperial pistol malfunctions and he's forced to fight them in hand-to-hand combat. He successfully takes out 2 waves, but as they get closer to the bridge to the refinery, 5 more insurgent teams approach. Luckily, the refinery has launched some TIE fighters to fly overhead and blast them away. And this action poses a question. If the transport trucks were under attack, why weren't they given an escort? Either by scout troopers on speeders or TIE fighters like what we see here. If this cargo is valuable to the Imperials, would it not be under better protection? The reflexive excuse would be, if they had escorts, then Mayfield and the Mandalorian could not take over the transport, and I would say that response would be somewhat correct. So, as a writer, you have to come up with a more creative way to get inside. The refinery is built by a river and is powered by a hydroelectric dam. So why not have the plan infiltrate the refinery by way of the hydroelectric dam? You still get your wearing the enemy skin opportunity with a guard patrol, there's plenty of forest coverage to hide for a surgical ambush, so it isn't outside the realm of possibility. But what you trade for this covert approach is a loss of a cool set piece involving fast vehicles and explosives. But since getting to that set piece opens up for relying on a contrivance, it sort of robs its value and effectiveness when they have TIE fighters come to the rescue at the end. There is even more of a contradiction when there are insurgents charging the refinery on foot and the platoon of stormtroopers rush out and shoot them down with impeccable accuracy, the likes of which we've not ever seen in The Mandalorian. So either these are the most elite stormtroopers ever, or what we've seen thus far is below the status quo. Not a single stormtrooper dies, gets blown up by those detonators, or is stabbed by a spear. It's incredible. The Mandalorian and Mayfield are saluted by the troops as they make their way into the refinery, and we learn that they are the first transport to make it safely to the refinery all day, which further validates my question as to why, if these insurgents are so frequent, that these transports don't have any security. These are the pieces in play in the original episode. There is a transport route. Once they get close to the refinery, insurgents attack and try to destroy the transport, and at the refinery, troops and TIE fighters come to the support of these transports. We see evidence of this with the wreckage of destroyed transports, so we know that this is a recurring action. So really, we come back to that question as to why the Empire does not provide protective escort for these transports. It would seem counter for them to attempt to ship any precious resources to a refinery if only 20% of them arrive at any given time. And since we know that they have TIE fighters at the base and were launched to help, it doesn't fit in line with the goals of the Empire regarding this part of the story. So, in order for this to work, we need to take what we know and apply it to the entire premise, which means adding an escort. Now, we don't have to have them be TIE fighters, or more importantly, only TIE fighters, but let's have some fun and increase the difficulty and have the TIE fighters fly above on patrols and scout troopers paired with a transport. Now, this narrows a time and place for our heroes to properly infiltrate. It gives us a cool set piece and makes them look awesome when they pull it off. So these will be the new parameters. We rewrite for the taking of the Juggernaut scene. The Mandalorian and Cara have to be in perfect timing to drop on the speeders after the scout troopers have been yanked off of them by way of clothesline. Mayfield gets on the dead scout troopers' comms and orders the Juggernaut to hold position in the cave while they address a motivator issue with one of the speeders. One of the troopers driving the Juggernaut leaves to help, giving us a ticking clock for the team to quickly change and get back on the speeders. They do so at the last minute and escort the Juggernaut to the refinery. They also have to do this before the next TIE patrol approaches, so everything must be timed perfectly. We can continue their journey similar to what was done in the original episode, and when those insurgents show up, the Mandalorian and Mayfeld have to defend the transport. One of them can lose their speeder bikes and catch themselves on the Juggernaut and fight off the insurgents until they make it to the refinery. You throw in the TIE fighters to do some covering support, and you still end up with the same resolution, but with a far more thrilling set piece. You get a difficult setup, an achievement, conflicts within the mission that need to be overcome, and finally, the victory. The result is the same outcome as in the original episode, but the stakes are elevated and the situation makes all parties far more competent and less contrived. This is how you employ those questions I spoke of earlier, but this isn't the only example of inconsistency and counterproductive actions. As they are cheered for their endeavor, Mayfeld leads the Mandalorian to the officers' mess where the terminal resides. Mayfeld is about to go in when he recognizes Valen Hess, an officer he served under. He tells the Mandalorian that he can't go in because if he is recognized, it could jeopardize the mission. Wow, I guess making those remarks about wearing a mask are really biting you in the butt right now. Maybe go back to the Juggernaut, put on your helmet, and walk back in to be less conspicuous than you are right now. It might benefit the mission. Mayfeld wants to leave, but the Mandalorian is insistent and offers to take the data stick and do it himself. But Mayfeld warns him that in order for him to access the network, the terminal needs to scan the operator's face. Why? What purpose does the scanning of the face serve? Is it to verify that it is an Imperial accessing the data? Because if that is the case, the Mandalorian isn't going to be registered as an Imperial soldier or officer. If it is just as a normal procedure to associate a data recall to an individual, would a name or a chain code not also be required? And if not, then what is the point of scanning the face?
It just raises too many questions.
In Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, Kirk submitted himself for a retina scan because it was a security measure to protective data. Again, we are faced with a plot contrivance to compel the main character to remove his helmet in order to achieve his goal. It doesn't fit rationally for the Imperials to have this seemingly consequence-free protocol. We were informed earlier through Mayfeld that the Imperials have the means to identify Republic officers, preventing Cara Dune from partaking in the infiltration. But when it comes to their data access, there's no security in place and a face scan with no verification or risk of consequences. Some of the functions for the conflict are kind of in place. When the Mandalorian starts to access the data and the computer cannot scan his face, it starts a clock towards a system shutdown. The Mandalorian removes his helmet to allow the computer to proceed, and through confirmation of the dialogue from the computer, it just wanted to scan a random face with no link or authority within the Imperial system. If the Imperials can scan and register Republic officers, why can't they do the same for their own people? Well, after this plot contrivance, the Mandalorian gets his data, but is stopped by Valen Hess, who wants the Mandalorian's name. The Mandalorian with no knowledge on Imperial protocols is frozen, and Mayfield has to step in to rescue the Mandalorian. He provides a cover story that Hess buys into, but before they can take their leave, Hess wants to have a celebratory drink for them being the only transport to complete their delivery today. Just more exposition to reinforce how the Imperials not giving their transports any form of protection is willfully ignorant. Hess doesn't recognize Mayfeld, which means all of his earlier apprehensions were for nothing, and if he wasn't behaving like a coward, they could have gotten in and out a lot quicker. However, there is an argument to be made that Mayfeld's flaw is his self-preservation above all, no willingness to sacrifice for the mission, and we find as this scene progresses that he overcomes this flaw. Mayfeld takes this opportunity to challenge the conviction of the Empire and Hess based on Operation Cinder. Operation Cinder, from my understanding, was a strike by the Empire against enemies and Imperial worlds, possibly to purge those that failed the Empire and also destroy vital infrastructure that the New Republic would repurpose for their own use. Without that existing infrastructure, the New Republic would have a harder time managing those liberated worlds. In other words, it appears to be a deliberate setback to everyone, including the Imperials, so that they can rebuild elsewhere while the Republic is stretched thin repairing the devastation and building a new government. You can't represent a society from the capital if the capital and its key departments have been destroyed by the outgoing administration. And it is because of this destruction that has Mayfeld irked, and this scene allows us to infer that this decision is what led to Mayfeld abandoning the Empire and becoming a mercenary. And this is a pretty good scene, as we have two characters talking about the same event with different perspectives. And with these points of view and motivation clearly defined on either side, we get great conflict and thus great dialogue between these two characters. Hess is an Imperial loyalist, arguing that it was a necessary tactic to employ to ensure the resurrection of the Empire. Mayfeld's loyalty was to those he served with and friends and family. It is fair to understand that at the time he believed in a cause, and during that journey saw evidence that put his beliefs in question. The most prominent part for Mayfeld was when the Empire felt the lives of their own were inconsequential when it came to the big picture, that the Empire wasn't fighting for order and peace in the galaxy as was the toted line by Palpatine, but rather for their own interests and domination. Information we as an audience can recognize, but many who serve may not. There's this argument that those who joined the ranks of the Imperials were fighting for stability and peace against a rebel scum that wanted to overthrow the ruling government. And this conversation Mayfield has with Hess confirms his suspicions. And when Hess wants to toast to the long life of the Empire, Mayfield shoots him, then proceeds to shoot the other officers left in the mess hall. Mayfield remarks that the Mandalorian can put his helmet back on and that he hasn't seen his face, indicating a form of respect for the Mandalorian's beliefs. This kicks off their need for an escape as the stormtroopers arrive, responding to the blaster fire they heard. They dash out of the refinery and head for the roof where Cara Dune and Fennec Shand pick off stormtroopers and gunners so they can be picked up by Fett. Mayfeld grabs a rifle, takes aim at the Rhydonium and blows it up, destroying their materials and most of the roof of the refinery. As they make their escape, Boba Fett destroys a pair of TIE fighters with that cool seismic charge we first saw in Attack of the Clones. Now, before I cover the final parts of this episode, this set piece between Hess and Mayfeld is something that still needs to be addressed. You see, Mayfeld's point when talking to Hess was that his fellow officers' lives had value. At least to him. He felt that they were betrayed by the Empire, and we can infer that he felt like a fool for following him, and anyone who survived like Mayfeld did could feel the same way. But while I completely understand Mayfeld killing Hess, I'm surprised about him killing the rest in the mess hall. They don't reach for their weapons, but rather stare at him just as shocked as the Mandalorian. It's not until he attacks them that others draw their weapons, and those actions can also suggest that Mayfeld may not believe in the words he just spoke, as he had no issue killing more Imperials who speculatively could be like him, just needing that one moment of revelation to change their point of view. It feels almost as hypocritical as when Finn, who wanted out of the First Order because of the needless violence and death of a fellow soldier, turns around and shows no conflict in destroying fellow soldiers to secure his escape with Poe. We know there's an emotional attachment on some degree, as he is called out as a traitor by another stormtrooper. What we needed here was a line from Hess remarking how after Operation Cinder, the Imperials learned who was loyal and who was not, and how everyone here chose to remain and fight for the cause. That line would solidify that the soldiers in this base are not the same as Mayfeld, that they agreed with the actions of Operation Cinder and agree that their lives only exist to serve the Empire and nothing more, something counter to what Mayfeld believes. And if a line like that was spoken to define the officers that serve at this outpost, then there is no conflict with Mayfeld's philosophy and his actions to shoot his way out of this place, because from his perspective and ours as the audience, we have zero doubt about the types of people that these Imperial remnants are. It would not even be a throwaway line, but one of great significance because it would outline the level of commitment the Imperials now have and their goals of blatant totalitarianism instead of them hiding in the gray area of peace through force that was the case prior. It goes back to understanding characters and their motivations. Mayfeld is out for himself, but not for obvious selfish reasons, but rather as a result because he came from a world where he thought he had support, but in actuality did not. And everyone he served with felt the same way until Operation Cinder. This created a flaw that we've seen throughout this episode, which is how much he cares about his own survival. A lot of his dialogue is about himself and his own views until we get to this conversation with Hess, where it starts off about him, but then segues into the innocent people killed. When he starts his attack, it is personal, an exorcism for what he went through, and these actions to him feels necessary to start righting the wrongs he contributed to in the past. At least, that is what I suspect the episode is trying to get across. Aside from that weird contradiction I pointed out, it can be argued that Mayfeld has earned a certain level of likability. Getting back to the conclusion of this episode, Fennec and Cara rendezvous with the ship, where Cara suggests that Mayfeld died in the refinery explosion, conveying to him that he's earned their respect and freedom, thus rewarding him for his actions and journey towards being a better man. So what does this mean for Mayfeld's future? I'm not sure at this point, but it was an interesting journey and the performance was quite engaging. With the Mandalorian and his team having the information they need, his next move is quite possibly the dumbest one he could have ever taken. That being calling out to Gideon that he's on his way to take back the child, thus allowing Gideon to make preparations to defend against a possible attack. I understand the significance of the lines spoken. The Mandalorian delivers the same speech to Gideon that he heard in Chapter 8 regarding the child. I like the different intentions that are behind both speeches. The Mandalorian's is one of care for the child. Gideon's is for his own personal power or status within the Empire. But story-wise, I find it foolish on the Mandalorian's part, as given the size of the force they're going up against in the next chapter, it really isn't wise to announce your intentions. Chapter 15, The Believer, is somewhat of an okay episode. Bill Burr really shines, but it still has those issues I laid out of no escort for the transport, a facial scan simply for a facial scan, and Mayfeld's contradicting actions after his speech about the value of soldiers' lives and their families. These contrived issues were present, but that didn't need to be the case and could have been retooled or avoided with another pass over the script by asking a simple question: why do characters do what they do? I hope that's a question that reaches the writing team of The Mandalorian, and that they ask it often as they work on future seasons and future shows. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.